Those are very dangerous.
Yeah, these are like weapons. If I fill them with poison, yeah.
I saw those in the Black Panther.
I haven't seen that movie.
Oh, no. I saw these in Star Trek. It's running on CBS and you have to pay for it. Discovery.
I don't watch TV.
Okay, there's a great question. How the heck can you be head of history and theory at SciArc and not watch TV?
I don't know, I wondered that. I think I might have to change my ways.
Yes, change your ways.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
would you take minutes, please? Take minutes. And minute number one.
All of the.
Marrikka is to change her ways.
I'm going to reform.
Pop, you have to watch TV. There's nothing more important than to be in touch with your times.
Yeah.
Do you feel that's true?
No.
Sylvia makes a strong point about contemporaneity and her generation of colleagues as theorists, the book, the Pink Book, short-term phenomena, flash in the pan, all were related to the fact that contemporaneity is actually what drives a discourse in any moment. And then it fades very quickly and it's never acknowledged as a force.
I think the only way that you can make that statement with a straight face is to have a deep knowledge of history and to be completely reliant on history as a model of deep change. So I'm not going to take her at her face value on that.
But you're in a school. The other night I was in London toasting.
Yeah, for Mark Cousins, yeah.
How do you know about it?
I know everything.
Okay, so you should know that to my knowledge there was only one other person that actually did know everything. There's a big difference between a know-it-all and a person that knows everything, speaking as one of those two. And if you go to the Architectural Association, there's a room you can go to, and on the wall, in a wood-cut block, firmly attached to the wall, it says, Kipnis is not a know-it-all, he just knows everything. And then under that it says, he says it makes him very tired. So now we have someone else that knows everything. It's a great burden to know everything. No one believes you.
Did you ever read that short story, Funes the Memorious, by Borges?
Who?
By Borges.
Never.
Jorge Luis Borges.
Is that the guy who had the map the same size as the world?
Yeah.
Nah, why would I read him?
Yeah, no, it's really good. You'd like it. So it's about somebody who actually sort of dies of fatigue because he can't forget anything.
Dies of what?
Fatigue.
Because he can't forget anything?
He can't forget anything.
I just take naps.
Yeah.
See, that's the problem.
That'll hold you over for a while.
A lot of these people from South America and this, they make a big, like a crisis out of, hey, you don't have to die of fatigue. You just take a few naps. It's not so bad. Knowing everything is a little overrated anyway. But you're at SciArc. So I was introducing Mark. Mark Wigley was there, who's joining us as this year's advisor to the thesis. Very close friend of mine. I spoke of him as my best friend, and there was a time in the early 80s when we actually liked each other. And Mark Cousins, in his speech, had sort of challenged the idea that anyone in architecture or the arts as such has any real interest in ideas, research, thinking, or education. Really seriously challenged the ideas, the foundation of scholarship in particular, that a school of architecture should actually pay any lip service to those notions. And it was tongue-in-cheek, of course, but it wasn't really tongue-in-cheek because it relates to the notion that anybody could ever derive a work of art or derive a work of creative architecture from thinking or from knowledge or from ideas. And And that was how he was summing up 27 years of lectures. And Mark Wigley gave the first toast and then took him to task, interestingly enough, in a very loving and nice way.
Was it lively?
Not yet.
Okay.
We're going to get to lively. And then I started I gave the second toast, and I pointed out to Mark Wigley that I teach at a school in which I would say there's not a whole lot of deep esteem for ideas and education and thinking. We don't have a lot of that here, but what we have now is Mark Wigley. You seem...
I'm not so sure that's true.
I know. I think you seem both enthusiastic to be here and as if you're the perfect person. I've heard you say this, and say this with a kind of loving generosity, not arrogance, that you believe you are the perfect person to be here now. And as we've talked, I've come to understand why you feel that way, and you feel that way not as a missionary or not like you're going to come here and fix all the problems. But this is a great time for someone with your historical disposition and biases, and also your love for the contemporary problems and enthusiasm for contemporary work that you find is the basis of our work. So can you say a little bit about that? How is that possible? So how is a deep history going to authorize someone else who's not knowing it?
Well, again, so those are maybe two separate questions. But the first thing that I want to respond to is the notion that somehow SciArc is indifferent to questions of pedagogy or questions of ideas or questions of history. I don't find that to be the case. I find, at least among the students...
Can y'all hear her?
Can you hear me? Yeah? At least among the students, I find a huge amount of enthusiasm, even hunger, for...
Ideas
and history and interpretation of those things. Yeah.
Are you sure?
And theory, yeah.
I think they like to hear an idea.
Yeah.
They like to think they have an idea.
I'm fine with a loose association between creativity and ideation. I actually don't think that there's a tight association there, and I don't think I would want that to be the case. I'm excited about anything that makes designers excited. And I don't care whether it's an accurate interpretation of a set of philosophical ideas, for instance, or historical premises. The reason I think that history and theory, and I put those things insistently together, in spite of your objections, is important, is because there is a way of thinking and acting in the world that I think is disciplinarily specific to architecture, that has been defined over a long period of time. And if we don't understand how that's been defined, then we end up acting in it in an unself-conscious and unhelpful way. So we end up repeating sort of same patterns or same sort of worn out ways of being and knowing. So if you understand that history is something that we create, that's constantly up for revision, is actually being revised, and if you understand that the parts of history that matter to us at any given moment in time are those that are most theoretically engaging, which is my position, then you're constantly able to mine the past in fresh ways, in ways that propose a future that's different than the present. And I think that's exciting to architects. It has to be exciting to architects, because otherwise, why the heck would you do architecture?
Good question. How did you come to be an architect? Why architecture? How did you even get here?
Do you know? So what happened was, my parents moved back to the United States. So you know my parents were missionaries. Yeah.
Are they passed
No,
away?
yeah, they're not missionaries anymore. Yeah.
But they're still alive.
They're still alive.
Yeah, but they're not missionaries.
They're not missionaries anymore. So my parents moved us back to the United States. I was 16 years old, and they moved to Texas, and they put us in school, and I took art classes in school, and I ran out of art classes, and I had two choices: pottery or architecture. And I didn't want to do pottery because they didn't have actually wheels. They just had you had to make little clay snakes and like put them. And I thought that's ridiculous. I can't possibly do that. So I'm just going to do architecture.
And what did they have for you to do? They have Strathmore, or you did little matchsticks?
No, none of that. We actually we learned how to draft. We did like a really, really early version of CAD.
So you studied like architectural design?
Yeah.
And this was in high school?
In high school, yeah.
How'd you
And
do?
then I did really well. I won. There was a little competition at the end of the class for an internship at a local firm. And I was in there. I was the only woman girl at the time, I suppose you could say, in that class. And all the other guys in that class, they were like the math and physics jocks. They were like,
Ooh, not the math and physics.
The math and physics jocks. And I could barely do geometry. And I won. I won the competition in the class.
How much history did you know?
Nothing. I still don't know very much history. Just the little bit that I know, I cling on to.
You call that the deep history?
Yeah, no, whatever little fragments of history I know, I cobble together into important constructs, as do you. Yeah.
I don't.
No, I mean,
the
that's the
history I know-
appropriate thing to do. If you know history, if you know like a little bit of history and you can make it meaningful, go for it.
The history I know is what Sylvia just told me on the phone, or what you just told me now, or if I'm in a really desperate situation, what Beatrice will email me. I learned something right before I get on stage. I say it as if I've known it for a very long time. As you know, Petrus was, I forgot what it was. It was Petrus was the city closest.
You're talking about Petrus or Petra?
Petra.
Yeah.
What's Petrus?
I don't know.
Yeah, see, it's a whole different place. Is near Petra.
Okay. Yeah, maybe Petrus is the guy who founded Petra.
Yeah, didn't they get raised by wolves or something like that? They were twins. Believe it or not, Petra was the city that was closest to all the world's supplies of frankincense and myrrh. And they had all the control over frankincense and myrrh, making them the richest civilization in all of history.
I did not know that.
So frankincense and myrrh can't just be spices. One has to realize that when they say spices in the Bible, so the three kings brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So
Well, I always understood from T.S. Eliot that the frankincense and myrrh were embalming.
drugs.
I thought they were embalming
They
things.
may be embalming when you're dead, but
Yeah.
I think you get dead because they must have been the best things.
Yeah.
I would have to say they were the ecstasy of their time.
Yeah.
Because when
Makes
you find
sense.
out that 70 countries from all around the world would come to Petra to buy frankincense and myrrh, it wasn't about making their fish any better. I have to say that. So we're close to it, but it's been my experience that a lot of architects that are quite smart, a lot of painters that I know are quite smart, have very good grasp, beyond, even better than mine, of the history of painting and its manifestation in contemporary work. Don't make them very good painters, whereas a lot of painters that are naive, sometimes they're good painters and sometimes they're not. A lot of times the painter knows some history. I don't find any way to correlate.
I don't care about that though. I'm not trying to make people more creative. Certainly SciArc has plenty of creative juice flowing through its veins already. That's not my role here. My role here is to understand what's important, how it is, and why it is, and how we can make it even stronger.
Well, I'm just wondering, how do you think of history and theory fitting into a role in a school in which the primary goal is to self-consciously push architecture to a wider range of possible agendas, possible efficacies?
Well, that to me, that's where history actually comes in quite useful. But I don't know, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. I mean, in my experience, it's very rare actually that you find somebody who's capable of engaging deeply with the history of the discipline, who's also capable of engaging creatively with the surface of where it is now. So it happens, but it's rare. And actually, I think we have some people at SciArc who might be able to do that.
People like students or faculty?
Faculty, yeah, and also students, right? Students that I am fortunate enough to teach right now, I think can do that.
And so when you're thinking about,
but there was a but.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think history and theory, especially taken together, can do in a powerful way, is expose what Deleuze way back in the day called unbound points. Possibilities.
Unbound points.
Unbound points. Remember in The New Cartographer when he wrote about, Deleuze wrote about Foucault?
No, I don't know that piece.
No, I'll send it to you.
It's in
I have it in PDF.
That's all right, just tell us about it.
Okay, so basically his point, so he's looking at the work of Foucault, his friend, and he's trying to understand why this guy was so important, what he accomplished by carefully, painstakingly, and completely sort of unevenly mapping the surface of various forms of power. Right, in a really idiosyncratic way. Like the more you know about Foucault, the more you realize like super idiosyncratic sources, et cetera, et cetera. So what did he accomplish in that? And Deleuze decides that what he was able to do was he was able to, by carefully tracing sort of various vectors and objects of power, sort of placing them in their context and sort of creating a cartography around them, that he was able to present a whole other set of possibilities that hadn't yet been taken up in the status quo in any way. And so the kind of negative space that he exposed, or what Deleuze called these like unbound points, which I think of as sort of constellations, like these little stars, these little moments of possibility in the very dark universe. That by putting those out there and showing that they weren't yet enmeshed in whatever hegemonic system, he made those available to other people. And that was what he did. So and I think that's something that history can do, right? So history can say, well, we've thought about architecture this way, we've considered it in this regime. So I mean, so like for instance, recent history, present history. So you and Sanford and Sylvia have all done this masterful job of presenting architecture as capable of embodying, representing, illustrating certain philosophies or scientific principles or truths about the world, right? You've been able to look at something and say it's in its appearance, in its physical presence in the world as an object is capable of doing X, right?
Also, let's say sometimes in its appearance, sometimes in its performances, sometimes in its narratives, to try to make sure it's not just in its appearances, but also in its appearances. Sometimes, and I'm just clarifying, not correcting you, sometimes in its status as a project, not even necessarily as a building, but also sometimes as a building. So the first thing to do is broaden the repertoire of what got to be counted as architecture. And secondly, to broaden the field of what counted as a genuine architectural effect, so that it got, so it just wasn't confined to the obligations of a professional architect. The professional architect has much higher level of short-term obligations. And so other kinds of obligations that we knew architecture had already been performing just to gain them permission. This was never an attack on professionalism in architecture, as you know. But, of course, having no attention span whatsoever, I've also abandoned all those positions and changed them and attacked them again and all that sort of stuff. But, I think a lot about Foucault because I think he's a fantastic philosopher, but I think he's a miserable art critic.
Yeah.
So he has made a painting that I consider to be a really second-rate painting, perhaps one of the most beloved paintings of all of history. And many people, even many people in the art world, consider it arguably the greatest painting ever painted.
You're talking about Las Meninas?
Las Meninas. You can find people in art history that identify it as one of the 5 or 6 greatest paintings ever painted. And all of this pretty much dates to a time when the geometry of the painting started to be analyzed and takes off when Foucault writes his analysis of it. And I think it's a second-rate painting that he painted to get a job. He painted it to get a job on the court, so it has all sorts of tricky, it's like a Steven Spielberg of painting. It's kind of full of painterly special effects that any idiot could get. Whereas two paintings that are sitting next to it in the Prado are...
What are the paintings? I can't remember. What are the paintings next to it?
One of them is called Pablo de Valladolid. He's just a guy standing like this in a modern... He's an actor. He's one of the buffoons. He's on this court, in the court, but he's standing against a completely modern space in his actor's position. And it's such an uncanny painting. It could have been painted yesterday, but the space that he's in, there's no inflection between the floor and the wall. There's a very slight change in shadow. His shadow is cast, but you don't know on what surface. So it's a totally modern space. And his face is filled with psychological angst, and I mean, it's the most unbelievable painting simply because Velázquez's technique was so great. He had no idea about psychology. Everything about that painting had to do with doing a painting, not understanding the history of painting, or you have to
So this is coming back to.
Wait a second. So the other painting is the dwarf in a corner, another buffoon. So who lives in the corner. I mean, he's fed like a dog. It's an extremely mean painting by Velázquez. It's the first painting ever to be painted that puts a person in a corner. You know, so these two paintings that are working in the disciplinary level of a painting, not the incredibly exotic philosophical level of the geometry that, you know, so that's why when you talk about Foucault, now remember, it was also Foucault who made the Panopticon famous.
Yeah, you know.
And now, is that a work of architecture? I'm just talking to you, I'm asking you.
No, because I actually, that's the part of Foucault that I find least compelling.
Yeah, but when you go around to most schools,
I know.
you'll hear the Panopticon diagram as if it's an architectural idea.
We have a joke in, I don't know, the 5 people that do what I do. We have a joke amongst ourselves, and it's either the Panopticon or it's the Palimpsest. You can walk into any school, any architecture school in the East Coast, and find one of those two things in fresh circulation.
And neither one. So do y'all know what the Panopticon diagram is? I mean,
They know.
Okay, but at this point in time,
they know.
There used to be this heavenly freedom at SciArc. You didn't have to even talk about it.
I think it's Todd who gave the lecture for many years.
Yes, and I consider it a freedom because the guy that invented the diagram was a philosopher. His philosophy was called utilitarianism. His name was
Jeremy Bentham.
Now wait a minute, you're going to love. Jeremy Bentham was so proud of himself and his philosophy that when he endowed a girls' school, which is in London, you can still visit it, he had himself stuffed and put on display at the entry to the dormitory of the girls' school, so that all the girls for the next 2 centuries would go in and see the man who thought of utilitarianism and endowed this school stuffed and on display at the front in the foyer of his school. And he's the guy who thought of the Panopticon diagram, which was, you know, one guard at the middle of the center of a circle looking at, you know, all the people, all the guards. And so it is an incredible piece of visual gaze theory, but sort of obvious because the Panopticon in Rome is exactly the opposite diagram, but both diagrams. But he also had himself, he's a bit of a kind of creepy guy, put on display. You know, I don't want this to be the I don't want him in the architect. You know, does anybody know who the architect of the Pantheon in Rome was? Marrikka?
I don't know.
See, so you know him and you know that diagram, but you don't know one of the great Panopticon diagrams and how important it was and how Hadrian's project got finished. You know, so the deep history of architecture, which is not so much that diagram, but a reverse of that diagram, we don't know as a history of architecture.
Yeah, I don't know. The deep history of architecture might be much more what, say, an architect like Robert Adam did with the Panopticon, which is actually not well known.
No, I do know. I mean, maybe you're talking about the project in
Edinburgh.
Edinburgh, yeah.
Yeah, on Carlton Hill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
But all those things are true.
Yeah, but I mean, so there's a kind of fall, a fall into materiality or a fall into objecthood that happens when architects are smart enough to encounter a theoretical idea and pick it up and run with it.
So, Darwin named his book The Descent of Man, and then a little bit later there was this TV show called The Ascent of Man. Be careful what you call a fall. Somebody else might think of it as the rise of the object.
No, I mean, I'm not saying fall as a negative.
Oh.
I'm saying when an idea hits the world of material things, all kinds of interesting, to use a very, very old philosopher for a second, all kinds of interesting swerves and resistances happen. And I think that's where architectural history becomes messy. It means multiple narratives are always possible. That means it's always available for us to reconsider and reappropriate. And it's what makes history creative.
Can you give me a favorite example? I can give you lots of examples. I mean, I'm not against, you understand, I'm not against history. I'm against the sense of obligation it sometimes carries.
I have lots of favorite examples. You know, one that I like is not particularly, I can't even imagine how I could quickly gloss its importance. There's a church. There's a church in a railroad suburb of London that has in its chapel a tile sequence, a striped tile sequence that runs up the wall. And so this is a Victorian architect nobody cares about anymore, except Victorian architectural historians, and there's like a whole crop of them. Like Britain still has tons of architectural historians who only focus on Victorian architecture.
Sure.
And people have been trying for generations and generations and generations to make meaning out of this really garish series of horizontal stripes inside this chapel. And there's been maybe 5 or 6 different major pieces published about it because nobody can figure it out. And I have a proposal, and I made a proposal, which makes it fantastically exciting to me, but also provides a way for us to understand how architecture at a particular moment in time could be enmeshed in deep theological and philosophical problems, deep scientific anxiety, even though the architect cared very little for those issues. So those are the moments that I think are really exciting.
Yeah, and do you care if it's right?
No.
So,
But I mean, it's compelling.
Now you belong at SciArc.
It's compelling.
I mean, that's what I think. If you tell a compelling story about this architectural effect, that's an architectural effect, and you bring that effect to life. Let's say you make it lively.
So you know, it's interesting because in the Renaissance, the way that they use the term, so they love to use the term lively in the Renaissance, specifically in Renaissance discussions on poetry and painting. And they always tied liveliness to a kind of artifice. There was a recognition that there was something in nature by itself, outside of a subjectival gaze, that was deadly.
It was
deadly. And so the notion that you could have something lively, quickened into life, or brought into a kind of creative impulsivity in the world was firmly tied to artifice. It was firmly tied to that act of invention. So yeah.
I see, so you would bring it in in two ways. As an ambition, as a worthwhile ambition, to quicken otherwise increasingly
Oh, no.
threadbare or
No.
still things.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I thought you were going somewhere else with that. Yeah.
Just, it's a worthwhile ambition to enliven.
I disagree that things are increasingly threadbare and still.
You do?
Yeah. I think they're every bit as active and filled with marvelous potentials as ever.
Okay. You're watching different. I know you don't watch TV.
I don't watch TV.
That's fine. Yeah. What do you read? I mean, I by the way, I feel the same way. But there's so much stuff. There's such a glut of stuff that to pay attention to it all, to find out its liveliness becomes increasingly a chore, don't you think?
Well, not to me, because I ignore most of it. I don't have your sense of obligation to the whole.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
just admitting that I'm much lazier than you are.
That's good. That's a comfort. But you also would like it to have something like, at least some certification from history. Back in the Renaissance, they also liked to liven things up.
Yeah, they did a really good job of inventing history in the
But I mean,
Renaissance.
it's a comfort. I don't want to be critical, but it's a comfort that they also I can tell you places that liveliness shows up in theosophic literature and scientific literature. I know something also about its etymology, its Proto-Indo-European basis. I can tell you what a physicist will tell you about lively. They will tell you that the vacuum is lively. So liveliness is an important issue right now. Liveliness is what someone like Sanford and I, who are matter theorists and do not want to make the mistake of vitalism, which killed Bergson's thinking, but would like there to be something like an élan vital, will replace vitalism with liveliness, so that everything is already not alive, but everything is always already lively.
Well, yeah, there's a really good, so we talked about this a little bit when you came to my class.
Right.
So the architectural example of liveliness would be sort of most deeply explored with iron and its potential to burst unexpectedly into chaotic life in the form of rust or failure, right? Because of the way iron is.
Or iron for blood. You need it to get your oxygen.
Yeah, as Ruskin very famously says, iron allows us to blush.
Did Ruskin very famously said that?
Yes, very famously, yes. According to all the Ruskinian scholars. There's like 3.
So what are you going to have these guys know? I mean, we're going to keep going on lively, but you came with great ambitions to
I did not.
reanimate
I came with very
these.
modest ambitions.
No, but we're going to reanimate and are going to reanimate the history theory program. And
No, we're going to make the history theory program.
you're not going to even remake it? Poor Todd. Tomorrow night. Let's just have some fun. So tomorrow night when Todd finishes, I want one of you to say, yesterday Marrikka said that we didn't have a history theory program, but we're going to need to make one. And let's just see what he says. He'll say, well, she was about to visit Ohio State to lecture. So you just thought they had kind of a grab bag one, and now you're going to make a coherent one. And the basis
But
of
not too coherent.
I mean, the coherence will be not chronological or not greatest hits. It will be, what will be the coherent? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm curious. Will it be thematically coherent? Like each year you'll do a history of lively, something else or something like that?
Yeah, no, I'm really committed to presenting cutting edge scholarship. So scholarship in history is always changing. We're constantly figuring out new things and updating old narratives, and we're finding that certain things that we didn't think were important before are now important, and certain things that we thought were important.
Every time I'm going to ask you for example. I like examples.
So I think Christopher Alexander is somebody that we typically have ignored in recent architectural history. I think Christopher Alexander is becoming more important.
Like synthetic of form, or in the local practices kind of stuff? Which
I think actually on both fronts. So we're actually able to do a couple of things now that he was trying to do and absolutely couldn't do. For instance, when he was trying to build a new community in Mexicali, which would have involved remaking the entire economic system around it. It was a catastrophic failure and a very embarrassing failure. But we're also so we're just able to do things now that we weren't able to do before.
Okay, well then I'm going to ask you to help me. I'm going to give you two situations that I found myself in, both of which I found myself behaving badly in.
Oh.
I'm swearing never to behave badly again.
Let me see your fingers.
As long as I live. So this could be the last time you see me alive. Eyal Weitzman. Do any of you know who he is? He's a totally wonderful architectural figure who I'm hoping we will have out here soon, who Israeli, did some really great design work, who decided he would start and go into begin and become the world's expert on something called forensic architecture, in which instead of designing projects, which he proved himself quite capable to be. He was a student at the Architectural Association after graduating from the Technion in Israel, did exceptionally good work, and then after graduating from that, took some of the work he had started to do there and began to do this other kind of work in which he would go in and analyze. Originally, he would look at bombs that had hit buildings and try to determine whether the bomb from the way that the structure collapsed, what kind of bomb was used, and then later on went further into media and media practices. Fantastic person to have in the field, simply because in a quantum leap, he expanded the repertoire of possible problems that an architectural intelligence could be applied to. But for several years, I was deeply angered by his place in the field, because he would come, give lectures, and there would be all these architects in the audience trying to figure out how to design their next project, towards what end. Should it be a metaphysical question? Should it be a scientific question? Should it be a performative question? Should it be a scarce resource question? What were the goals that they were going to use? And they were doing that to make their lives and their work feel valuable and important, that they were making some kind of contribution to humanity. And all of a sudden, Eyal would walk up and say, look, I'm doing architectural work, and what I'm doing is testifying before the United Nations about incredible, horrific behavior by the Serbians. And he just all of a sudden seemed very important, and as if to make the lives of a professional designer trivial. And I thought to myself, this is just a gimmick. You're not going to testify in front of forensic people. You're coming to architects to make them feel inferior about their work. How has that got anything to do with architecture? So you're looking at a mosque and you're not telling me is as good as the blue mosque or bad. You just say it blew up this way because this column was here. So we had these big fights in public, and it continued. And finally, we met on the street at the Venice Biennale, and the fight just started again. And he finally said, listen, Jeff, I just think architecture is a big enough discipline with enough intelligence. It's got a lot of room for a lot of stuff. And I thought to myself, this is exactly what I said, probably 10 years earlier. And I just looked at him and I said, you're right. And I'm stupid, and I'm not going to do this anymore. And I started inviting him around, and he is fantastic at getting people excited about ways to know buildings, not like a structural engineer, ways to know his discipline. But nevertheless, nothing he says can ever contribute to the problems, even of a speculative architectural discourse.
So Weitzman started a project called Decolonizing Architecture.
Yes.
With a wonderful architect named Sandy Halal.
Yeah, that's right.
And Sandy, who has received considerably less press than Weitzman, but is in every way an equal collaborator in that and many other projects, is the official architect of the UN War Refugee Association. So
Right.
all of the displaced Palestinians, all over the place in camps, in long-term camps, whenever they need something planned or built, there's Sandy. And she wrote a piece for me not too long ago where she talked about the way a plaza was designed and built in a camp. And the whole piece, so she wrote it as if it was a play. She didn't use real names. A play in 4 acts. Planning this little plaza in a camp, so fraught with all kinds of large and small questions about whether or not people were going to be able to build additional stories onto their supposedly temporary dwellings, whether or not you could have public space in a temporary occupation, whether or not investing in a particular location meant abandoning the dream of return. All of these things on the table took years, basically just to clear a little bit of land and preserve it for some kind of public activity. Who was going to be allowed in the plaza? What were going to be the rules? Was it going to be walled? Were women going to be allowed to be there by themselves, et cetera, et cetera? So all of this is playing out. And in my opinion, the way that she wrote about that project and the way that she talked about its outcome and its impact is every bit as disciplinary as Colin Rowe writing about the mathematics of the ideal.
See, that's a wonderful example because it translates immediately into some aspect that the expertise of the discipline as a discipline meets the questions. So I'm going to just try another example. John, your colleague, probably a generation older than you, John, he's at MIT. He specializes in sort of the business and corporate background behind architectural.
John May? He's not John May? He's not at MIT?
Yeah, no, not John May.
Timothy Hyde?
No, John, Timothy writes about brutalism.
No, he writes about architecture and the law.
Yeah.
And brutalism factored into that for a while.
Yeah, for a while. Anyway,
John
I'll give you the example, and then you'll know who I'm talking about. Long before this, one of the great works of modernism was done by Bernard Tschumi's father. It's the Nestle headquarters in Lausanne. This building was built just at the time when Nestle was engaged in one of the world's worst crimes. They were giving out milk to
That's right.
lactating women in Africa,
That's right.
Get milk substitutes, just long enough to stop the mothers from lactating.
Yeah.
And then they would withhold the free samples.
Is it John Harwood?
Yes, John Harwood.
Yeah.
And so one of the greatest scandals in corporate history surrounds the financing and building of one of the great icons of modernism. It was the only 3 buildings were ever featured in an entire issue of architecture aujourd'hui, a Unité, the Farnsworth House by Mies, and the Chicago Post Office, and this building. So it is a spectacularly important work of architecture, and then it got caught up in this mess, And so when you read John Harwood's work, it's a fascinating account of the business background. So you find out that Charles Luckman, who did the restaurant at the airport that looks like a spaceship, was the person who owned Pepsodent, the toothpaste. You wouldn't know this. He was a great architect, but he was a great businessman, not a great architect. Did the Aon building here, built that restaurant. He also started a toothpaste company because it was successful. He bought Procter & Gamble, and Procter & Gamble bought Lever House, and so he commissioned the Lever House building and ordered Gordon Bunshaft to use the first curtain wall. And so he's responsible for this. So to find out all this background about Charles Luckman, you find out that all from John Harwood. So you get this incredible view of the development of architectural construction and building and design from the point of view of corporate business practices. Or if you read Alejandro's history of the technology of the curtain wall that he did at the Biennale, you realize that all of the modernist curtain wall design principles that we teach in design studios are totally obviated by the technology and codes of design that's the material history of, I don't know if you know this as well. So there are these 3 or 4 histories, you know.
Surprisingly.
Pardon me?
Surprisingly.
Yeah, all of which are totally fascinating, and each of which could inflect a sense of design, none of which are connected to the ways that.
Yeah, but you know, there is a way to do it. So, and I think the guy who did it maybe is slightly more convincing. I mean, like, I love John Harwood. He's totally brilliant.
Yeah, I love to read his. Again, it's a bit like Eyal.
I think it's kind of like reading like the tabloids for architectural history.
Yeah.
Right. But I've never been convinced that he is in any way interested in architecture.
Well,
he's interested in a forensic understanding of architecture that I don't find particularly useful.
But he's very clear. He says, there's not only nothing I can say to an architect, anyone who has an ambition to say something to an architect to influence what they're doing is making a mistake.
Yeah, we differ on that. Yeah. Radically differ. I mean, that's the Aggregate Project, and you know, I'm not a member of
That's
Aggregate.
the no projective criticism.
Let's get serious about history.
It also means each person is already, in a sense, a historian and theorist in their own. In other words, you're not an individual, but you are individuated, and so you have consolidated in a huge amount of sociology, history, economic theory, just in your own formation, and you're not absent any knowledge as you turn your attention to architecture.
So, the person I think did a better job of trying to unpack that, how you might do that, is Reinhold Martin in Utopia's Ghost, when he talked about the Union Carbide disaster in Bhopal.
So tell him.
So, but I can't remember the name of the firm. Do you remember the name of the firm? I don't remember.
Just make it up.
I don't know. The name of some firm. So basically, there was a
Hardeman, Johnson, and Smith.
Something like that. I don't think that's actually not it.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I swear to God.
Okay. Well, anyhow, it doesn't matter. So there's a U.S. company that basically directly contributed to the poison gas
Johnson, and Smith.
deaths of sleeping villagers in Bhopal, India. And at the same moment, Martin writes this history of this really compelling design of their new sort of suburban campus. They're moving from an urban campus, which is a kind of one model of this corporate identity, blah, 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 which Reinhold has already written about before he wrote that book, to a suburban campus where kind of excruciating attention is being placed on the status of the individual. So at the same time that certain people are being counted, and sort of the corporate policy, which is obviously perpetuated by individuals, to just point out the obvious, is describing a set of people in India as being non-persons, denying their status as persons, denying their status even as victims. At the same time that they're doing that, they're also working with a prominent architectural firm to elevate the status of their employees into these kind of hyper-individual subjects who all deserve their own view of the exterior, who all have all kinds of environmental controls, tight HVAC controls in their interiors. And Reinhold, I think, does a pretty compelling job of pointing out the status of architecture as a creative, formative impulse in the world in the context of those other misdeeds. So he's not treating architecture as evidence, but he's treating architecture as a participant. And that's where I think Harwood goes a little bit off for me.
Okay, so are you getting the distinction here? What I'm trying to do, I want to kind of close with this idea of what do we do with lively a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so
So you were talking about liveliness the other day as sort of wood and meat and iron. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say to you, for example, according to that argument, how would you place the tuberculosis hospital of, what's his name, from what you call it? The Scandinavian architect who did the tuberculosis thing. Yeah, that guy.
I haven't thought about it. I mean, what are you saying, that there's something?
Do you think
is there something criminal involved in that?
You think it's a very important work of architecture?
I think it could be.
With a little more work?
Yeah, a little more work, yeah.
The fact that it had in the end, ended up with no relationship whatsoever to tuberculosis.
Well, I don't think that's important.
Yeah, that's what I think that's important to say.
Yeah.
So, but I also think quality of light, I think all the things that we say about it that sound so stupid to say, don't also say why it's an important work of architecture. I think understanding the handrail, how it governs the entry and exit, I mean, understanding in detail all the tricks of the architecture in that building that are about architecture, not about the building function. Mm-hmm.
But
that you could never understand from any of this other forensics you just, that's the part all this other stuff adds incredible interest. It adds value. But it's very hard for me to see how it adds technique.
Well, but I think this is where we need to maybe get a little bit more expansive in what constitutes architecture. Mm-hmm. So I remember you saying, way back when you were teaching my class at the GSD, long ago.
Yes, I remember that when I was in diapers.
Do you remember the one time that we interacted in that class?
Yeah, I mean, you reminded me, but I now remember,
that you said, there's a set of disciplinary concerns that are shrinking, something to that effect, right? So there are all kinds of things that used to be on the table as architectural material that are now off the table because they've been taken off by things like the law. Mm-hmm. So hospitals, you were saying, I think that was your specific example. Hospitals are no longer.
Prisons and hospitals are gone. That's what I said at the time. They're still gone. By the way, height of a building is now gone.
So I actually think as many things as we might argue in different ways are off the table for architecture now, there's a whole set of other things that become on the table. So I think that's where maybe we differ a little bit. Things like programmatic access, I think, so Koolhaas, I think, put that on the table.
You think so, but you think it's still on the table?
Yeah, I do think it's still on the table.
Now this would be a real interesting debate.
I think environmental control systems are now on the table in a way that they haven't been in a long time.
I tell you what, I'm going to buy you a TV set. Tomorrow, thank you guys for coming. That was really important for this school. I'm going to totally transform this school in one day. Do you have electricity at home? Uh-huh. Okay. If nothing else, I'm going to make your babysitting easier. Tomorrow I'm going to bring you a TV set.
Okay.
So I want everybody to watch the PBS show. It's called Prediction, A Matter of Numbers. It's running right now. You probably can. It ran on Nova last week, which means it's not on your regularly scheduled thing, but just go to the PBS station and you'll be able to watch it. You might have to give $5 to your local station, or just, I don't know, you kids have some way of stealing it for free. I really don't know how it works. Okay? And I'm not saying this is important because this goes to lively. And then skip the first two-thirds of the first two-thirds is about how statistics works and how it was invented, and it would be good for you to know this. And it will cover, if any of you have ever been in my classes, it goes to the importance of the Bayes theorem, which if you've been in one of my classes, I've been making you memorize Bayes' theorem for the last 8 years. And and solve certain problems with it. And everybody hates me for doing that. But there's be a little section in there about why Bayes' theorem has just changed the entire world over the last 10 years. You can ignore it again, because it does mean you have to see a number. And I know how horrible that is. But immediately after that, they're going to get into this thing called the black box computer learning problem, and why the entire world changed in the last 3 years, and no one knows it. And it's why Koolhaus's programming is gone. It's why contextualism went away when context started to respond to contextual problems so fast that there were no more contexts. How buildings meet the sky went away when we could build so tall, the behavior of the building that high no longer was at all related to the sky, plus we started flying and going into outer space. So technology has obviated a lot of these problems. So what happened 3 years ago is they started to build algorithms, trial and error algorithms. So they're called black box algorithms. You know about, y'all probably know about this more than I do. I just found out about this, and about the algorithmic space. And instead of programming it at all, they just put it in a situation where it gets input of trial and error, builds its own, and writes its own algorithms. And so 2.5 years ago, they started one of these black boxes to learn how to play Go without teaching it anything. They showed it the rules, and it's sort of like cellular automata, but they designed a synaptic algorithmic structure. And in 2.5 years, which happened 7 months ago, it beat the world champion. Yep. And now they have these algorithmic black boxes for virtually every kind of human behavior. And they don't know what the program is.
Yep.
So for example, they have algorithmic black boxes for which people should be paroled and which people should not be paroled. And they're letting people be paroled and not be paroled, or get certain kinds of medical treatments and not get certain kinds of medical treatment. They have no idea what the program is.
But if I can just make an obvious point.
I don't know. You haven't yet. You've been deep and smart up till now. But if you can make an obvious point now, I'd feel better.
So the they is still interacting with the black box with the self-learning algorithm.
They're not. They have no idea what. They're only turning it on.
It's true that there are certain forms of machine learning now that don't require direct input, right? That's AI.
This is, that's why I would like you to watch this, because this is not AI, and this is, you'll see a statistician say, in the middle of the 15th century, there was 2 letters written that started statistics. Nobody had ever understood that statistics could intervene on gambling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the discovery that you could use numbers to actually make a prediction about gambling invented insurance, double entry bookkeeping, just changed the world. This idea that you don't even do anything but design a circuit, and you design it like a synapse, and you have no idea what it knows and how it knows what it knows, but all you do know is how it performs.
But it's just another sort of wonderful way that we bring new entities to bear on the world. But it doesn't change the fact that we're still in the mix, right?
Well, I think the point of it is it seems like it's totally changing the idea. But from my point of view, like Alejandro will tell you that the reason he introduced envelope theory is that the very short period of time when anyone in the architectural world had any relationship to planning, if you're in the business of architecture, is over, because professional planning consultants, you'll get a plan. So when he went to do John Lewis and he wanted to work on the plan, they just said, absolutely not. Mm-hmm. Here is your plan. Don't even touch it or you're fired. Same thing with the Birmingham redesign. So if you're going to do pret-a-porter architecture, even if you're Tom now, even if you're Gary, even if you're doing boutique high fashion design, increasingly the degree to which the institutional building type is so fixed in its expertise on the program. Even Rem doesn't, that's why he said, I mean, I know I'm not trying to disappoint you.
No, you're not disappointing me. I just find it interesting the things that you're willing to give away as fixed, and the things that you're.
I used to fight like mad about this. The
Yeah,
last thing I think is left is schools. Fight? Are you kidding? If you will lead the fight for, an architect walks in and somebody says, "Why do you know anything about how a school works?" And you're going to say, "Because I've studied other schools," and they're going to say, "I've got this black box
Yeah.
that they can predict every step everybody's going to make, and whose IQ is going to go up and who isn't."
Yeah, and then the architect will turn around and say, "Oh, I have a black box too. Here
I
it
have a
is."
black box plus a history of other schools. Okay.
Does
Then
that mean
you
we're?
want to talk?
Yeah, I think
Is that Tom Wiscombe?
we can't actually see any of you, by the way. Yeah,
Is it 2 o'clock?
it's
You have
two.
to-
It's 2:02.
Don't you have to quit?
Yeah,
Okay, no time for questions.
we can have a few questions.
Anybody got any questions? I was so interesting, it just kept going and going and going.
We didn't really talk about liveliness very much.
Oh, well, we're going to get back to that.
Okay.
I so love liveliness, I don't want you to ruin it. Here's the thing. On liveliness, I think let's end on quickly, let's raise it and you can discuss it, and everybody else wants to go. Lots of architecture
Except you guys.
situations, they'll stick a word out in the air, and then people will chase it. And I don't want that to happen. You don't want that to happen, right?
Nah. Hate words.
I love words because I make somewhere between $1 and $3 every time I put one down on paper or type one into my thing, which is pretty great. And all they do is count those. It's 5 letters and a space is $1. So I try to use long ones.
Yeah. Stanford's ahead of you on that one.
But you go to Princeton and they have a topic for their thesis and everybody's just trying to do it. It's just so stupid. So I don't want you to do lively. But I thought to myself, like, what phrases come to mind? And I kept thinking, a lively imagination, something like that. Like, let me at least use it in a sentence. And then I realized that,
Wait, but you haven't used it in a sentence.
well, lively imagination is as close as I could come. I don't work in sentences.
That's not a complete sentence.
Now I need a nap. I know, now I need a nap because, I'm so... So Wolfling said, I can think about architecture because I have a body. It's a really wonderful thing to say. Now, I don't know if that's right or not. I just know Wolfling said it, so I can get away with it. That's such a great thing to say, and it turns out Leibniz said it too. You go to heaven, you get a perfect body. You got to have a body. So Wolfling drew this connection between empathy theory, why we do architecture, and the fact that there's a relationship between the building and the body. And so this idea that a lively imagination is to imagine the body through architecture as producing liveliness or becoming liveliness. I got really excited about that prospect. That to get lively as an ambition in the air without saying what it meant. You know what I'm talking about? Like that song, "Let's get lively, lively."
I knew you were going to burst into song at some point.
What was that lady from Australia, that little short, skinny lady? Let's get physical, physical. Yeah, Olivia Newton-John. Is she still alive? She must be old. She's like my age. She sang a song called Jeff, too, which wasn't to me. But I think we should have this sense of lively is if you could produce it as an effect, as an after effect of the discourse we introduce, rather than a theme to do.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm
And
with
how are
you.
you going to do that?
I don't know.